Today, I am delighted to introduce Anna Nielsen, the first speaker of this series. Anna is a third-year PhD student in anthropology. She's currently developing her dissertation research proposal to examine questions of the environment, landscape, and sustainability of the early historic Kofun period, particularly those pertaining to water management. The title of her presentation today is Archaeology and Landscape in Japan's Kofun Period, Examining the Past to Protect Our Future. Welcome, Anna.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for coming today to this talk. Do mention in the chat if there are any technical difficulties if you're unable to hear, because sometimes that does happen. And thank you all for coming today. So as Junko was saying in her introduction, I am an archaeologist working in Japan, and I study Japan's Kofun period, particularly water systems in that time. Since some of you may not know what the Kofun period is or know very much about it, I wanted to give a very brief introduction to start. It's an early historical or pro-historical time period of Japan's history from about 250 AD to 600 AD, depending on where you are. And it's characterized by state formation processes and influx of new technologies from the continent, and these very large tombs known as Kofun. You see one here, many of them are keyhole shaped, and that's where this time period gets its name. So I came to University of California, Berkeley about 3 years ago, 2018. Been fortunate enough to work in Japan this whole time until very recently. Of course, that hasn't been possible, but of course, there are other things that we can do to continue our research. And so I've been working under Dr. Junko Habu and other archaeologists here to learn more about methods and theoretical frameworks that apply to the Kofun period. And one thing in particular that's been impressed on me by people here at Berkeley is the value of concepts such as resilience and sustainability, especially as they relate to landscapes and as they might apply to the Kofun period. So archaeologists, we have an advantage in a way, since we look at very long time spans. We have a very great depth of history or of data to work with, perhaps more so than other researchers of environment or landscape who may only have a few hundred years max of data to work with. Archaeologists can look at very long time depths and determine patterns within this data. And so models such as the adaptive cycle model, which you see here in this figure, are very valuable in helping archaeologists think about systems, especially environmental systems, and how much disturbance they may be able to absorb. Disturbance in the form of, for example, a natural disaster or human-caused environmental change. And at what point these systems or an environmental system might reach a point at which it's a tipping point. Either it leads to collapse or reorganization of resources. And archaeologists are, I would say, perhaps uniquely positioned to look at this data in this way. And I've been focusing on how these principles apply to the Kofun period. The concept of disaster archaeology has been around for quite some time, but has been particularly valuable in recent years, especially in Japan. In Japan, disaster archaeology has been around for quite a long time. Archaeologists have been looking particularly at Japan's distinctive natural disasters, some of which you may have heard of, tsunamis and earthquakes and such, but especially in the last 10 years. As many of you know, this next month is the 10th anniversary of the very serious March 11th earthquake, tsunami, and nuclear reactor disaster in the northeast of Japan. This was actually what inspired me to become an archaeologist studying Japan in the first place. I was in high school at the time, and this had a very strong impact on me. But this concept of disaster archaeology, especially in recent years, has led more people to ask, more archaeologists to ask themselves what they can contribute with their field and with their access to this very deep time span of data and of patterns and of knowledge, what they can contribute to the present and to the future, particularly in natural disaster management policy and, in preventing loss of life. And so I want to now, having given a very brief introduction to sort of the very basics of what I do, I want to leave Japan for a little bit and go across the world to the Near East to show you a case study of what it is I'm hoping to do in Japan. So a few years ago, I was very fortunate to be able to go to southern Jordan, to the site of Petra, with the Brigham Young University Adair Monument Plateau Project, where we worked in this site. Many of you may have heard of it before, even seen it in some popular action movies. This site is very famous for the rock-cut tombs and monuments and other structures built by a group of people called the Nabateans, who lived in southern Jordan about some 2,000 years ago. And slightly less famous in this site, which is very massive, by the way, it was a very large city, are these canals and cisterns and these water systems, many of them carved into the rock, that still exist today. Some of them are falling apart and some of them have been maintained over the years. And so while we were there, our project was mapping and surveying these sites using a lot of remote sensing techniques. We'd use drones, we'd use GIS mapping. You can see there my colleague is using a Trimble total station to be able to collect data. In this area specifically, we're excavating a water feature, which we called the Great Circle. You can see about a quarter of it is excavated, but there's a very large circle in the sand, which was at one point a catchment pond to catch all of the rainwater that would fall a couple of months a year. As you can see, this is a very desert environment. Water is very important. It rains very heavily for a short time part of the year, and a lot of times there's serious flooding and other disasters associated with this. And then the rest of the year, there's very little rain, and the water was essential for keeping this city hydrated. And we were studying these systems and mapping all of this data, which is very important in paleo landscape reconstruction and reconstructing how the landscape may have looked 2,000 years ago. And so we had several goals. Of course, we wanted to research the past. We wanted to learn more about how the Nabatean people had constructed and used these water systems, how they prepared for disaster. We wanted to preserve the future. This right here is the Adair Monument. It's a World Heritage Site, and you can see it's very scored and damaged on the front, up through about 9 or 10 feet. Actually, it's more like 3 meters. It's very tall. You can see all of that scoring. It's just from flooding. It's all water damage as water swirls around in front of the monument during the flooding season in winter. So of course we wanted to protect the monuments, but most importantly, we wanted to help the people who are still living there. We worked and lived alongside the Badul Bedouin tribe, who have been using these water systems for quite a long time and maintaining them. And in clearing out silted up water systems and restoring them to functionality, we were allowing the people who live there to, one, share their knowledge with us, which they've been using these systems for quite a long time, and two, have more access to water, which was vitally important to their lives. So the question is, what does this have to do with Japan? And I feel that through a lens of water and disaster management, these excavations showed me ways in which environmental approaches to archaeology not only help us learn more about the past, but help us work together with local stakeholders and benefit communities wherever we are. And it's it's a way that archaeology can be used to actually tangibly benefit the lives of people today. So going back to Japan, I want to introduce my focus area. So this is the area around Okayama Prefecture, Hiroshima Prefecture. Near the Seto Inland Sea. As you can see from this map, these little keyhole shapes all represent different Kofun, very large mounded tombs. And this was a Kofun period center of power, especially during the middle Kofun period. And I'm hoping to work in the landscapes near the city of Okayama. I was supposed to have been there last summer as a visiting researcher, and with the COVID-19 pandemic, that hasn't happened. But the wonderful archaeology department at Okayama University has been working very patiently with me for over a year to try and make it possible. We're very tentatively hopeful for this next summer. This is Skudiyama Kofun, which is one of the mounded tombs relatively near the university. And now I want to introduce a little bit about rice farming in Japan. So rice agriculture came to Japan before the Kofun period, at the beginning of the Yari 2,300 years ago. Rice farming came into the archipelago and then spread slowly up through the archipelago to become a very important staple crop. Now, many people think of rice as a very quintessentially Japanese food. But rice farming, wet rice farming, which is the technique favored in Japan, requires flat lands, terraces, and construction of these paddy fields. This is a picture I took at Yoshinogari site in Saga Prefecture, which is a Yayoi period site. And here archaeologists have been reconstructing Yayoi period rice paddies to do experimental archaeology and see how people may have grown rice. And in this time period, people needed to be low, close to rivers, and their rice fields were very vulnerable to water-related natural disasters. If there is any flooding or a particularly heavy rainy season, that could be catastrophic, especially as people came to rely more on rice as a staple. So going into the Kofun period, as I said, this was a time of increasing state formation and new technologies coming in from the continent, especially, along with immigrant groups coming in. And the sort of structure and makeup of these rice fields changed a little bit as new technologies arrived. And so now we start to see building of rice fields on a larger scale. We start to see iron tools on a larger scale and earth moving techniques, stone lined canals, retention ponds. Some of the retention ponds that were built during the Kofun period or shortly thereafter are still in use today by farmers. And these new larger scale techniques allowed Kofun period rulers who hoped to consolidate their power to bring previously unusable land under control. Now that they were able to move water to new areas, they were able to plant rice they previously had. Japan is very mountainous, as many people know. Not very much of it is arable. This is a slightly older map, but it illustrates pretty well that a lot of Japan is forest lands. 4/5 of Japan, even today, are forested and aren't suitable for agriculture at all. And so it was important for rulers to be able to maximize the amount of land they could use to be able to build their wealth, to consolidate their power, and to have some people build them a very nice Kofun tomb as well. And so working in Japan I think it's been a wonderful thing, because Japanese archaeology has many amazing strengths, one of which is a wealth of data. There's so much data in Japan, especially from the 70s and 80s, because there have been quite a lot of rescue excavations that have gone on. And there's more data than I could ever go through in a lifetime. And I want to be able to make use of that. Another great strength of Japanese archaeology is the familiarity that Japanese archaeologists have with remote sensing techniques and other non-destructive or less invasive forms of survey, which is very important, especially in areas which, as you can see here in this picture, there's a town right up against this Kofun tomb. There are people's fields around. Archaeologists, this is no longer an era where archaeologists can just go and dig wherever they want, especially because excavation is inherently destructive. We need to come up with ways to gather data from the landscape without destroying that landscape. And so so I've been to Okayama several times to try and develop a methodology that would work well and be low impact for surveying water use and these water systems during the Kofun period. One thing that I think is interesting here, this picture that I took on top of Tsukuriyama Kofun, you can see around where the school group is, there's actually damage where that plastic is. They're covering up where there was collapse of the tomb itself in these very heavy rains in 2018. I took this picture a year later, and it just kind of illustrates how these problems are, they're timeless. There's always been serious rain and serious flooding in Japan, and this is something that people in the past are very aware of and would have tried to prepare for. So I've thought a lot about what are the most ideal models for a project. And even before COVID, I wanted to do something that was lower impact than just going in and doing things the traditional way, just, digging up to your elbows. As I said, I wanted to develop a methodology that uses and builds on existing data, because there's been so much excellent work that people have already done. a project that's cost effective and that is less inherently destructive and is less invasive. And I also wanted to develop a methodology that can be applied to many areas and sites across Japan, outside of Japan. If we can develop methodologies for looking at water systems and how they connect to each other and what sorts of measures were in place to prevent disaster, particularly without destroying the landscape or without having to excavate everything, that can be really valuable for comparative studies in other parts of Japan or in other parts of the world. In a project like this, there's also a big role of TEK, of traditional ecological knowledge, as we call it, knowledge about the landscape that's been handed down over time. It's also very important to keep in mind ethnographic fieldwork or experimental archaeology, like you saw with the fields at Yoshinogari. And these all play into the major themes of sustainability and resilience, because we want to be able to not only promote these ideas of sustainability to try and have more sustainable futures with regards to safety with water use and water conservation, but we also as archaeologists want to be very sustainable in our approach so that there, continues to be heritage for the future, cultural heritage or tangible heritage found in the ground. So to wrap up, this is a project that has yet to be put into motion, mostly because of COVID-19, but there are many ways that we can still continue to do research even in limiting circumstances. And so I wanted to sort of just highlight the broader, most important impacts of this. The idea is that analyzing water management in Japan's developing states can give us insight on how to better use and conserve water resources now. When you look at people in the past, how are they successful? How are they unsuccessful? When did they fail? Examining disaster mitigation techniques used people in the past can be very instructive in helping us learn how to better prevent or mitigate disasters today, because these disasters, these are not problems that have been solved by modern infrastructure or anything like that. Also today, particularly Japan faces a lot of human-induced environmental crises related to water, including the effects of dam reconstruction, river resurfacing, managing contaminated wastewaters, especially after the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear meltdown. We have all sorts of issues with radiation there. And a lot of these issues are faced by countries and people all over the world as well. And exploring these problems, looking at case studies from other places can be really, really valuable in promoting the ideas of resilience, sustainability, and in offering practical solutions. So I wanted to wrap up here, but also leave you with a question. I know many people listening now are researchers working with aspects of Japan or East Asia themselves. And so I wanted to leave you with some questions to think about. How could we continue to carry out research in a pandemic? What are ways that we can, especially since many of us work between Japan and the US, what are ways that we can foster connections and be able to continue projects like this? Because this is a time where interdisciplinary research between different disciplines, archaeologists and other people, in my case, or between international groups is more important than ever. What are some of the ways that we can foster these connections and promote this during and after the COVID-19 pandemic? So I wanted to wrap up now. Thank you everyone for coming to listen. I hope you will continue to come to the rest of the series and hear what other researchers at UC Berkeley are doing with regards to Japan. So thank you.